The African Union this past week set up a 9-man advisory group to work on a plan to deploy artificial intelligence in the effort to tackle insecurity, facilitate conflict resolution, and enhance good governance on the continent. One of the 9 wise men chosen by the continental body for the onerous task is Nigeria's Samson Itodo, the founder of YAG Africa, a non-profit that promotes democratic governance, human rights, and civic engagement. With Africa currently fighting serious fires in Sudan and Democratic Republic of Congo, and still dealing with the fallout of the crisis in Libya and the Sahel, could artificial intelligence offer a way out and lead to the sanitization of the electoral process in the 54-member nations of the regional bloc? On the show today, we shall pick up on this matter with Malam Baba Yusuf, a certified IT professional, strategist and policy analyst, and the first substantive managing director and CEO of the first airport free trade zone in Nigeria.
Indeed, after that conversation, we'll shift to a conversation about women's health with Stephanie Koka Aderinokun, a women's health advocate and founder. The Future is Her Foundation. And she will be here to discuss an initiative that she is championing for government to implement a day dedicated to women's reproductive health in government schools.
That's right. And on the morning show too, well, Arise special correspondent Abiowolawi went digging and eventually found enough material to put together an enthralling package on Nigeria's architectural industry. It's definitely a must-watch, and we trust that you will stay tuned for that. And just before we wrap up, we will bring you a review of newspaper headlines from across the country. It's going to be all that and more today on The Morning Show.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Well, we're going to kick off the morning show today with an update from Syria, where the death toll has risen to more than 1,000 people after 2 days of clashes between Syrian security forces and loyalists of ousted President Bashar Assad. A war monitoring group made the announcement on Saturday, adding that it is one of the deadliest acts of violence since Syria's conflict began more than 13 years ago. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said in addition to 745 civilians killed, mostly in shootings from close distance, 125 government security force members and 148 militants with armed groups affiliated to Assad were killed. It added that electricity and drinking water were cut off in large areas around the city of Latakia. The clashes, which erupted on Thursday, marked a major escalation in the challenge to the new government in Damascus, 3 months after insurgents took authority after removing Assad from power. The government said they were responding to attacks from remnants of Assad's forces and blamed individual actions for the rampant violence. Now, this is absolutely frightening. I think this is one of the deadliest things that we have seen come out of Syria in recent years. And they are saying that they are blaming the fighting on responding to attacks from Bashar Assad's, remnant of his forces. But this is the Alawite sect. It's the sect he comes from. We're told that over 700 civilians have been killed, including a report that says that there were men who were killed, in close range, like shooting style, lined up in a village and killed. And what we're seeing coming out of Syria does not give confidence. Now, the current leader has said to the news agencies that this is expected, that they're still trying to shore up the defenses of the country. But just last week, we had Israel also bombing military targets in Syria, destroying weaponry in Syria because they believe that the situation on ground is very unstable. And so, I always say that when people talk about revolution, and you never know, because, very often, even in this part of the world, people say, oh, we just need a new guard, we should have a revolution, we need a change. And what we've seen coming out of the Arab Spring, the revolution that we thought would be some exciting thing is crisis. Even Libya, the enslavement of even Nigerians in Libya and the breakdown of security in North Africa is something that's frightening. But what we're seeing out of Syria is absolutely horrific, and I don't think that we're going to see the situation settle down anytime soon.
I definitely think the Alawite Council as a group definitely believe that this is just the government that's targeting them. I think they have made that very, very clear, in as much as the government is saying that, oh no, listen, like you rightly said, it's just a remnant of the previous governance that we're trying to fish out. However, it is important to understand that when you have people like the ousted President al-Assad, they are not just an individual, they are an institution. And as an institution, they come with a lot of people that support and back them, sometimes even down to the tiniest cracks in society. So I think that's the conflict that they're currently trying to resolve. And like you rightly said, it's completely frightening. I'm hoping that the United Nations can actually get in on this, and hopefully, this has been years and years of fighting. Hopefully this comes to an end soon.
Let's hope so. I'm not so sure about the United
I'm
Nations
not so
part
sure.
of part
I'm
of
not
it.
so sure, but the
Because who is
allies are
United
asking
Nations
for them.
without the US? And we know what the US is dealing with, at this time.
America
when it
first.
comes,
Wait.
to,
I think you need to expatiate on what the US is dealing with right now, so people don't assume that there's an act. Let's expatiate on that.
everybody knows what the US is dealing with. US is focusing on US affairs, America first.
Okay, so the US is dealing with Trump.
Well, Trump is the president.
Uh-huh.
And the president speaks and acts for the country.
Yeah.
And it is America first. Who would deploy anything? Who would say anything through the White House? Who will authorize what needs to be said?
Yeah.
If there needs to be deployment, who will authorize it? So when we say America, we're talking, of course, about the government. Yeah. And we know that the American government, as at today, may be outside of the direct intervention in favor of Israel. It doesn't look like America is interested in any other thing, except, of course, for Ukraine, to fall in line, which is what Trump is doing. So when I said I do not have high hopes on United Nations coming into Syria and intervening in the manner that will be swift and that will be decisive.
Particularly when we're talking about the U.S. now and Trump, because America and Russia do have veto power on the UN Security Council, and Russia was one of Assad's most significant allies, and I believe he's in Russia now.
Yeah,
that's where where he fled to. So if the Alawites, because they are a minority clan, but they were a minority clan that held power for decades in Syria, and so there is a resentment. And now what we're seeing, this type of violence, is the type of violence you see in civil wars.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's retributive, violence, and it's something that, yes, we need international community to step in, but I don't believe it's something the UN can even do, considering Russia and America's role on the Security Council. We now have America voting with Russia and the UN Security Council. I don't think this has ever happened since World War II. This is probably a problem for Arab leaders.
Which may pose a positive, a kind of hope for Syria if America aligns with Russia, and then there's an intervention. If Russia is thinking, just like you said, what has happened to Syria now with the rebels taking over, if it looks like they might be ready, they were ready to take over governance, but they're not ready to rule. An intervention might be necessary, and I see, of course, Russia playing a role. So my point is, possibly. So if Russia aligns with with the United States, maybe that can fast track the sort of intervention that is possible. But as I said, Israel is topmost on the minds of America at this point, and then it will be Russia-Ukraine war, particularly if Ukraine falls in line. So if America aligns with Russia, and Russia thinks that the revolutionaries have failed in Syria, maybe something can happen. But then the point that Adesua made about the fact that Arab Springs, particularly the Brotherhood in Egypt, we saw what happened. They didn't even last 1 year after taking over governance in Egypt. I hope that is not what is happening in Syria. But then if you're killing in 2 days, 1,000 is dying, you said it's retributive violence. Revenge war never stops.
It never stops.
Because people will come back, people will be armed. And
that's the thing, which is why it's not something that needs to happen after the fact. It's not thinking, like you rightly said, revenge.
3 months after Assad,
that's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying. Whatever him being ousted is what I'm saying, right? Yeah. This is not something that has happened this is something we've seen play out over time in history.
Over and over.
You get my point? So it's not something we can think about after the fact. How do we protect these people? Because at the end of the day, it still boils down to the 1,000 people who've lost their lives. And now there will just be another statistic that will end up in history books. So it's quite sad.
Absolutely. But there's a lesson for Africa in all this because of what is happening in DRC Congo and the role that Rwanda is playing. I hope that AU is watching so that it doesn't descend into the sort of a thing that we are seeing now in Syria.
We have to be intentional about it, otherwise it will. And that's just another conversation we'll be having on another morning show episode.
Absolutely. Very shortly.
Well, the role of architecture in the built environment cannot be understated. And in this special report, Arise special correspondent Abi Owolabi explores the intersections between human design, ergonomics, and structural integrity in Nigeria's architectural sphere. Take a look.
I was always interested in the idea of the built environment. I've always been interested in culture and art. And architecture for me was a really interesting way to think about the world around us, both in a temporary sense, but also the impact of architecture lasts beyond any of our lifetime. So I was always interested in thinking about those ideas.
For Papa Omotayo, architecture is a lot more than just a profession, as there is a more integral factor at the center of his work.
For us, we're really interested in how architecture intersects with people's lives and how we think about that through the lens of cultural spaces. So those are public spaces, those are art spaces. And I think for us, it's really investigating that public arena of architecture to sort of find new ways to think about the idea of what architecture can be and how it can engage with people's everyday lives.
Papa's practice has worked on a variety of projects that span reinventing public spaces, exploring the relationship between vegetation and architecture, and a West African art museum project in the offing, amongst a host of others. So when it comes to the intersection between design and culture in the built environment, what factors come to the forefront here?
It's people. I think everything is about people. And I think when we think about design, when we think about culture, we have to ask ourselves, the people make the culture, you know, the people hold the traditions. And especially in our context as Nigerians, the history of how our people live and function builds the culture and ultimately builds the intersection of the environment. So whether it's like how our culture of celebration, you know, when you go to the areas of Lagos Island and areas of Lagos where we still want to be on the street to have communal celebrations, or how we intersect with our regular traditions. It's really about how people, and I think there is a tendency to think about cities from a very Western viewpoint, where we want to transplant the ideas of cities that were sort of generated post-World War I in Europe and in America to our context. And what people understand, cities are really systems, and those systems are based around how cultures and how people live. And I think it's really important to be adaptive, to think about cities as a way to express how people live, not a way to impose on people how they should live.
Structural integrity is a foundational litmus test for any architectural work. And with the collapse of a number of buildings in Nigeria over the last few years, comes shakier faith in the regulatory process.
Most of these things are not just about the private architects, they're also about the government agencies that are supposed to oversee them, and they're really stretched. But then this also feeds into the education system, right? Which is like, for the kind of city that we're trying to develop and the speed that we're trying to develop, do our educational systems and institutions have enough resources to churn out the kind of people that are able to ensure these things don't happen? So these things are interwoven.
Regulation, due process and responsibility are key to mitigating potential risk in the built environment. Prerequisites that mother-daughter duo Helen and Victoria O'Shaughnessy understand quite well.
We talk about the quality of the building in terms of, meeting international standards, in terms of even fire safety and all of those sort of regulations, the fire exits, the equipment, the sprinklers, and the communal spaces as well. A lot of times when you don't provide, the support staff their own spaces, you'll find that they end up using, the staircases to rest or to relax. And these are all safety hazards because in an emergency, those spaces are cluttered, So we've really thought through, the provisions and what we have brought, to the table for the users, that they don't have to look far, to find anything.
I am meeting with Helen and Victoria to discuss Nigeria's growing recognition in the architectural and design space. As one of their collaborative projects, MHQ Lagos, a sustainable co-working office development, shortlisted for the prestigious World Architectural Festival Awards in 2016, and also at second place in the Future Office Building Development category, is a notable project. But what makes this development so special?
What we have observed is that, first of all, the difficult and challenging economic climate in the country, for instance, has meant that, people are looking for more efficient spaces to work in, So you find that even bigger companies are wanting spaces where they can be in one place, and they can collaborate between their different departments and work more efficiently that way. So here we're offering, spaces that are big enough to take bigger institutions, and companies, but small enough, to accommodate the little startups and the young SMEs and, entrepreneurs, because we have a variety of spaces to offer them. That is what has basically driven, this building, offering a combination of different spaces for people.
We have easy, straight access to really anywhere else in the city. And so you get both dimensions of the benefits of being close to Ikoyi OVI. But because we're in Lekki, you get those high quality, grade A finishes, you get premium service, and you get proximity, and you get it at a fraction of the price and at a much better value per square meter than if you were in Ikoyi OVI. And so that is really the advantage, both the location and the premium quality that you get in this location.
From flexible day rates to more long-term office space, this facility caters to a wide range of workspace needs.
We had an event where we brought in speakers to share their experiences, and it wasn't just about sharing their success stories, but it was about sharing all the challenges that they have faced. And this kind of unique opportunity for transparent conversation is an opportunity for people to learn about the hurdles that they might experience, but also find a way of, building relationships and building community and supporting and sharing ideas. And that is really important for us. And that vision is really important. So it's not, the building itself is more of a physical representation of really fostering that idea and bridging those knowledge gaps.
Proximity and fair midpoints for accessibility are great selling points, but the human design feature for creating communal spaces is just as key.
So this is our seminar room. It has a 42 seat capacity, and so this is what you'd use if you wanted to.
Accessibility to finishing materials and keeping up with government regulations are some of the challenges of executing a project of this nature in Nigeria. But the exchange rate and project cost takes the bulk of the weight.
We had planned to deliver a fixed cost contract to the client, but obviously with the dollar-naira exchange rate, we found that the cost of things, just kept on escalating and basically, tripled the cost of the project.
I think the shared economy is the future economy, because I think the idea of individual resources ultimately leads to more waste. And I think when we look at the quality of life matrix that everybody seems to, I think that people understand everybody's sort of justified to. I think we live in that space now where everyone's like, well, why can't this person also have these same things? That sort of lends itself to a shared social structure. But again, these things need support. I think if they're just stuck where it's about investment and returns as opposed to building community and building ecosystems, I think we're always going to struggle.
The discussion around African modern cities, gentrification, and its architectural approach is just as topical.
African cities, we go through so much difficulty, and somehow our resilience and our innovation allows us to sort of be a lot more flexible in how we, manage through these things. Obviously, there's huge deficits in infrastructure and housing, but I do think there is so much learning on the continent that is part of how the continent and the people have had to exist over the last half a century or more, that can really inform how cities of the futures can be rethought and ultimately inspire the rest of the world. So I do think there's huge optimism. But I think, again, it's about how much of our authentic selves, our authentic experiences are we willing to integrate into the redevelopment of how we think cities on the continent should be. And I think that is a real question we need to ask ourselves.
Technology is playing a key role across industries. And while many embrace the rise of artificial intelligence, Papa begs to differ when it comes to architecture.
I believe that the work that I'm interested in is about the relationship between human beings, and that can only be sort of discovered through interaction. So, of course, we're fully aware of the opportunities that AI has, but we're also I'm personally quite skeptical to it in terms of what it's really going to do.
Brick to brick, and from concept to structure. Nigeria's infrastructural space looks to keep building way beyond the blueprint. Abby Olawi for Arise News.